This happened last winter, and I haven't been able to speak to anyone about it apart from my closest friend. I feel like sharing it here just in case someone else has experienced something similar. It's a bit out there, but stay with me. It all started with a dream, and then I had the same dream again in quick succession. It was like a dream of an acquaintance I hadn't made yet. I know that doesn't really make much sense, but in my dream, I followed someone. I couldn't tell you why I did that. Maybe that's because that's the very nature of dreams. They're supposed to be abstract, aren't they? So I followed this person because it made sense to me in the dream. They seemed to know where they were going, and it made sense for me to follow. I use the term person here because I am unsure of the gender. It's a dream. It's all unclear. Yet I have a strange sense of déjà vu. The person ahead seemed to notice me. I even get glanced at over the shoulder, but they don't seem to mind me following them. We walk through a lively town into a desolate area. It appeared to be some kind of former railroad line. I remember this part pretty clearly. As I walked along the railway tracks, there was a fence to my left, and a little further on there was an overpass. There looked to be a pedestrian bridge, which would allow people to cross over that railroad. Down further along the tracks, the line seemed to elevate a little, but we turned off at that point. I followed the person in front as we crossed that bridge over the tracks and into a overgrown area. We brushed through the frozen-looking overgrown plants and weeds and out into a desolate graveyard. All the while, the leader never looked back at me, the follower. It was at that point I started to feel scared. It was as if the dream was at the tipping point, and it was about to plunge into nightmare. Suddenly the graveyard was gone, and all around was nothing but white, empty fields of snow. Then the person I followed quickly leaves, but I don't follow. I understand that I'm to be left behind. I'm unable to move. My feet have sunk into the snow. I'm stuck in the snow. And that's when I woke up. The second time I had that exact same dream, something else happened. I woke up at the point, like last time, where I get stuck in the snow in the white fields, but then I was able to get back to sleep. When I went back to sleep, I was back at the bridge and I was all alone. Someone called out to me from afar, pleading with me not to go any further. The voice was distant and it echoed. I didn't recognize the voice either. I hated that dream. I felt quite disgusted by it, to be perfectly honest. I wanted to remember it though for some strange reason, as it did feel like a second-hand memory to me. So for the first time in my life, I started a dream diary. I also prayed. My family have always been quite religious, so it wasn't life-altering for me to pray. I prayed for myself and I prayed for the person in my dream. I prayed that nothing bad would happen to either of us. I didn't have the dream again after that. About 2 weeks later, I went on a walk with my friend, and we went along the Yamanote line from Ebisu to Shibuya. I had never walked that route before. My friend and I would often head out on walks for our health or just to chat. I think we were both restless kind of people, so walking and talking for us is miles better than sitting and having a coffee. During the walk, something dawned on me. The scenery. It all looked familiar. It looked like what I had seen in my dream. On the left of the Yamanote line, there is an overpass that takes you over the tracks. That looks like the pedestrian bridge from my dream. The tracks seem to elevate too beyond the bridge. I have to admit, I felt a little scared when I saw that. It was like reliving those dreams I had had. I didn't know what to think. One part of me was screaming, "Get out of there!" But the other part of me was telling me that I was overreacting, and I needed to find out more. I even mentioned this to the friend I was with. I told her all about the dream I had had. I think that it was freaking her out. I could see it on her face as she tried to feign interest and hide fear. We slowly walked closer, but we didn't get very far. We both let out a scream as we approached a telephone pole and a vending machine. There was a paper note there, with some brushstroke writing on it. And it read, Scenery from a dream. We both stood there baffled and horrified, watching our labored breath fog in front of our faces. I haven't been back to that area since. I don't think I'll ever go back there again, and one thing for sure is you'll never catch me crossing that bridge. That bridge from my dream. It was all too scary to be a coincidence. That's pretty much all I could say about this experience. I know it isn't the scariest. It feels similar to déjà vu, or perhaps it's all part of some kind of prophecy. At least I know there's one other person who's had the same dream as me, though. Has anyone else seen anything similar in their dreams, which has appeared then in reality? Hi, Jay here. I'm planning to go to Japan next year. I'll be in that area in February. What do you think? Should I try and find out if that note is still there? I know it's a hell of a long shot since this story surfaced online in 2020, but I can try to show you the scenery of a dream at least. You know, the bridge, the tracks, etc. That might be something. If this generates a bit of buzz, I will try my best to go and have a look. Who knows? Maybe I'll even make it to that graveyard. This happened roughly 30 years ago, and it's something that I've only told a few select people about, up until now. It happened one night. Me and my girlfriend at the time drove to the beach. After work I went to pick her up, and we headed straight to the beach. However, when we arrived at the beach, it was already pitch black. I mean, we should have known better not to go so late, but for some reason we both really wanted to go that night after work. It was roughly about 10 p.m. by the time we got out of my car. We were talking in the car, eating our McDonald's we had stopped to get on the way, looking out at the darkness. At least we could see the waves rolling against the beach. That was worth the drive, I suppose. I can't stay out too long. I have work early in the morning. My girlfriend didn't respond when I said that. I thought she might have been annoyed at me for saying that I had to leave so soon. I looked over at her, and I noticed that she seemed to be transfixed on something out at sea. "What is it?" I asked her. She didn't answer, so I looked in the direction she was looking in, and I saw a strong beam of light swaying across the waves, far from the shoreline. "Is that a squid fishing boat or something?" "I don't know," I said to her. "That's not a squid fishing boat. The light isn't right. Hey, don't you think it's getting closer?" I looked out at sea, and I agreed. That bright light definitely seemed to be getting closer. It was shaking as it moved along the waves. It looked as if it was heading right for the shore. Maybe it's a fireball. Hi, Jay here. Fireballs are like will-o'-the-wisp kind of paranormal phenomena in Japan. Visually a little like an orb or something like that. These balls of fire appear at night and are said to be the souls that have been separated from the earthbound body. Back to the story. If it was a fireball, then it wouldn't shine so bright, surely. That's 100% a UFO. She said it so excitedly, I was kind of taken aback. I didn't know until that point that she had an interest in the paranormal or the occult. I looked at the mysterious light a little closer, and she was right. It wasn't a flickering kind of dim light you might expect when you think of fireballs. It was a strong, bright searchlight shining down at the waves. I heard myself absent-mindedly agreeing with her by saying, "Yeah, I guess that could be a UFO." At this point, the light was only about 200 to 300 meters away from us. That might sound a little strange, so let me just say that the beach we drove to was a very secluded one. The shore wasn't that far away from where you could park your car. We liked this beach because there was never anyone around at night. There wasn't much light in the area. It was perfect for a nice, secluded evening date. As the light of what we thought was a UFO approached, I noted that I wasn't scared. I just thought to myself, wow, this could be a UFO. This is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of deal. And then my girlfriend said, "Hey, isn't that light getting to the shoreline now?" Yeah, it was. I snapped out of that state of awe and I began to panic. I saw the light go over the waves at the shore, and I knew that it was about to illuminate the sand on the beach next. The gravity of this situation set in for me. Put your seatbelt on. We gotta get out of here. I started the ignition and I pulled a U-turn, and then drove out of the beach area at breakneck speed. As I drove, my girlfriend continued to stare at the light. I heard her call out in a frightened voice, "That light is shining right where we were parked up." I was really panicking. I was driving for our lives. I felt like a rally driver, and at one point I drifted out onto the sand. Finally, we made it back onto roads which were well lit, and a sense of security we lost down by the shore slowly came back to us. I pulled over, and I remember I had goosebumps all over my arms. When I took my hands off the steering wheel, I noticed that they were drenched in sweat. We spent the rest of the journey in a hushed silence. I think neither of us knew what to say to comfort the other. If she was anything like me, then she was replaying it over and over in her head. That weird overhead light advancing on us. It was headed straight for us, and moreover, it seemed to be looking at where we were parked. It was like it was coming for us. I dropped her off at her place, and when I got back to mine, I just laid down on my bed. I was there wondering if what happened truly happened, or if it was some kind of dream or misunderstanding. I met my girlfriend the following day, and I asked her outright, "That wasn't a dream, was it?" "No, of course not. I was there with you," she replied. She seemed a little skeptical that day. I don't know how to describe it. "I wonder what that was," she asked, rhetorically. Last night she had been so sure that it was a UFO, but now she was questioning herself, it seemed. Of course, I didn't know what it was myself, so I didn't have any form of answer for her. Well, that's where it sort of ended, I guess. One thing I can tell you is I ended up marrying that girlfriend, and 20 years on from that night at the beach, the memory of that strange, bright overhead searchlight faded away. That was until one night we were watching a TV show about Japanese nationals' abduction cases. For those unaware, there are a large number of missing person cases, which are tied to North Korea. Approximately 470 people have been abducted, and according to the Japanese government, as of November 2021, abduction cannot be ruled out for a further 873 individuals. During this TV show, they showed a map which had all the locations where they believed that the abductees were captured and kidnapped. What did we see on the map? Well, none other than that secluded beach we drove to that night, 20-something years ago. I looked at my wife, and she was staring at the TV, stunned. We didn't encounter a UFO that night. We likely encountered a North Korean ship coming to shore. They could have easily seen us pull in and park up. I felt a chill race down my spine when I realized that we could have ended up as kidnapped victims. If I didn't drive off when I did, we could have been abducted. Since that day, whenever North Korea appears in the news, I think to myself how lucky I am to live the peaceful life I have with my wife. The realization that it wasn't a UFO but people with evil intentions was hands down the scariest moment of my life. This happened over a year ago. I remember that I left my family home just before lunchtime to head off to my part-time job. I always walked to work. I was saving for a car at the time, but the walk wasn't exactly a long one. It was a pretty dull one, though. I grew up in a really rural place. There were fields and fields as far as the eye could see. The houses in my area were well spaced out and sparse too, which meant that there wasn't a whole lot of passing traffic. It was perpetually quiet. There wasn't ever much to look at on my commute by foot. Like I said, fields, a few houses, and there was a small cemetery along the way. On the day that this took place, there were no people on the streets and no passing cars. It was a real quiet day. I didn't feel with it that day either. Something was off. It was like I was constantly being absent-minded. I think I was a little overtired because the shift I had had the night before was pretty hard, as far as part-time work goes. I was lazily marching my way to work, not thinking about anything in particular. And that was when I noticed something. There was someone behind me. Well, I felt as if there was someone directly behind me. I don't know when this person began to tell me because I hadn't been paying attention. I will have to explain a little about my commute at this stage for the next part of my experience to make sense. The road that I walked along to work was in a straight line. That straight line runs through the middle of all those open fields I spoke about, and most importantly of all, my journey along that straight line pretty much begins at the moment I set foot outside of my front door. So, there were no houses, buildings, winding roads, hidden lanes, alleys, or anything for someone to emerge from or join me on my walk without me likely noticing it. What I mean to say is everything was visible. If there was someone in a field a mile away, I would have seen them coming in pretty much any direction. So, how I ended up with someone tailing me without me realizing was something highly unusual to me. While I continued walking, I wondered how long this person had been following me for. When I thought about it a bit more, I realized that the guy behind was now closing the gap between us. Whoever was behind was now speeding up. Before I even took a look behind me, I thought that it might be a male. His footsteps were getting faster and faster, so I decided to try and attempt a sly look over my shoulder to see who I was dealing with. However, when I looked back behind me, I noticed that there was no one there. That's crazy, I remember thinking. I stopped and turned around so that I could look back, and the strangest thing happened. I felt as if someone was staring at me, but there was no one in sight. I knew something was looking at me. I could sense it. Some innate part of me knew that I wasn't alone. Something was there with me. I just couldn't see it. I immediately thought that I needed to get out of there, and fast. I turned to leave, but my body resisted. I don't know if that was due to shock, surprise, or fear, but I couldn't move a muscle. My back then felt cold. The chills I felt weren't limited to my back, though. It was like an ill wind was flowing through me. I don't expect anyone to understand what I'm about to say next, but this is the best way I can describe it. It was like my internal organs were cold. It was like cold hands were rummaging around my insides and wrapping cold fingers around my beating heart. I needed to get out of there, and fast. Something was seriously wrong. I thought that if I didn't figure out how to get out of there, then something bad would happen. But in the end, I couldn't move. It was like this unseen person was holding me in place. I could almost feel arms around my neck. It felt disgusting. And then suddenly I was released. I sprinted as fast as I could from the scene it took place, while periodically looking behind me as I ran. I headed to my part-time job, and all the while, the weird sensation I felt around my neck did not subside. My neck felt very uncomfortable that day. I tried not to think about it. I tried to chant this sutra healing chant in my head while I walked. My aunt taught me it when I was little. I took some medicine at work, but my pain didn't go away. After I had some of my lunch, I ended up throwing up in the bathroom. It was really embarrassing. I finished work by the evening, and when my day of work was done, I still didn't feel any better. I had no appetite, so I went to bed without dinner. I didn't sleep well that night. I was shivering in bed, and my neck just felt terrible. After an hour or two of light sleep, I woke up and I threw up again. I was really concerned about my health for a while there. but after about a week I managed to return to my usual self. I was really relieved. I really was worried about myself back then. I didn't know what I could do. I was pretty naive, I guess. I have walked along that road many times since that day, but I've never encountered the same thing again. I've thought about it a little more, and maybe what I experienced was some kind of spirit passing through. I don't know. It definitely feels like the whole thing was paranormal. I mean, I'm no expert, so if anyone knows what that might have been, and if I should be worried, or should have done something, then I'm all ears. Maybe it was a brief possession. I'm fine now, though. I mean, I think I am. I work in renovations. Occasionally, we are sent to jobs in the middle of nowhere to work on really run-down houses. Usually on bigger jobs, I go with my partner. We usually do internal repairs and sometimes work in tandem with other companies who do the external repairs. On the job in question, it was just me and my partner. The exterior work had already been completed, so it was just us. When we got there, we realized that the place had been abandoned for a long time. As soon as we got in, we saw something. A red crayon began to roll down the stairs. It bounced and gathered speed and fell at our feet. I thought to myself, that's kind of weird. It was weird, but in these abandoned houses, it's pretty common to see graffiti and stuff like that, so I didn't pay it much mind. I thought that some kids who had snuck in had left it behind, but as it came from upstairs, I just called out and said that if there was anyone in the house, they better leave now before we start work. There were a few more crayons lying on the stairs. It was pretty unusual. I didn't get a response when I called out, so I thought the coast was clear. The building we were in was a 2-story house. Our plan was to work separately. One to work upstairs and one to work downstairs. Upstairs didn't seem all that appealing to me, so I was grateful that my partner said he'd be heading up there. After a few minutes, I heard a hell of a commotion coming from upstairs and my partner shouted out, and then I heard the thunder of his footsteps coming down the stairs, coupled with his panting voice leaking expletives. He looked my way and affected a laugh. I called out to him and said, "What's going on, man?" He said that while he was working up there, a crayon rolled along the floor, and when he noticed it, he naturally looked up to the direction it came from. He said that he saw a girl stood there in the hallway staring at him, and as he shouted out in shock, and kind of staggered backwards away from her, he looked away to see where he was going, and when he looked back, the kid was gone. Well, that was a shock. Sounded more like a movie, but I've worked in many weird places with my partner, and honestly, I've seen some messed up things, so I thought to myself, why would he lie about it? It's kind of embarrassing, you know? After he told me that, it was kind of like the atmosphere in the house shifted. I was a little spooked. I didn't know what he saw, but I didn't like the way it sounded, like there could be someone in here with us. After a while, I called out to him to ask how he was doing, and he said he felt sick. I did too, to be honest, so we decided to step outside for a little break. As we were heading out of the front door, my partner stopped and stood like a statue, seemingly fixated on something. If you looked carefully at the wall at the end of the corridor, you could see the faint outline of a hidden door. We both remarked on how careless we were to have missed it as we approached it. We decided to get in there and see what was beyond the hidden door. The door didn't have a handle or a knob. It looked like once it was shut from the inside, it would take some trouble to get in or out. After we kicked, pushed, hit, and pried, we were able to get in there. What lied beyond the door was a dark, dark room. As light spilled in, we noticed a familiar sight. There were crayon scribbles all over the room. Everywhere we looked, it said the same few words. They were written over and over again, and those words were, "Daddy, stay out." I don't think I need to tell you what we were thinking at that point we saw that. I mean, my friend saw an apparition. We have a secret hideout, or something worse, with some childlike writing on the wallpaper in the dark room saying, "Daddy, stay out." I don't know what happened in that place, and I really don't want to guess either, but I'm assuming it's something really bad. My partner and I left, and we just never went back. We just took a loss on that job. A very long time ago, I went on a business trip to a certain place, Hokuriku region of Japan. I booked a business hotel which appeared to be in a nice enough location. Seemed to be relatively close to my clients too. I took the train and I got off to meet with my clients, and I had a couple of drinks with them. After we met up, I headed back to my hotel. It only took about 20 minutes to get back to the hotel from where I met my clients. I must have been more tired than I had realized, because before I knew it, I was dozing off on the train. I woke up at the wrong time, just at the point where I heard the doors begin to shut at the station my hotel was situated at. I had no choice but to watch as I headed away from my destination. After about 4 or 5 minutes, the train stopped at the next station, and I hurried off onto the platform. My plan was to get on a train, facing back the way I came. As soon as I got off the train, I was struck by how empty the platform was. I was completely alone. I looked all over for a sign of life, but there wasn't one. There was no one around. Towards the end of the platform, there was a wooden building. It looked like a shack to me, but it might just be where the station attendants took their breaks or something. So I headed over to it. I knocked at the door, but no one came to answer. By the way, this happened at night, but it wasn't super late. I think it was about 11 p.m. or so. I mean, I would have expected to see quite a few passengers milling around, but like I said, it was just me there. I remember that the fluorescent lights at the station seemed so dim and ancient. It was like the station had the worst maintenance ever, or had been simply forgotten about. I guessed that I had got off at a local station, rather than a limited express one, and that might be why it was so quiet. Maybe the locals knew that there wouldn't be a train coming for a while, and that's why no one was there. Well, that thought made me kinda nervous, to be honest. I didn't want to be stuck at that desolate platform all night. I was in the second largest city in the Hokuriku region. This kind of local deserted station just didn't seem like it belonged here. I walked out in front of the station. I wanted to see if I could see some train times, a timetable or something. It was pitch black outside the front of the station. I thought that there might be a little convenience store nearby or something, but all I could see was a wall of darkness ahead of me. Well, there was one building, actually. There was this creepy, run-down-looking house. A real old-fashioned one that looked like it was right out of a horror movie. I didn't like that. I managed to find a dusty train schedule, and it looked like the next train wouldn't be along for another hour. I was so frustrated. I had no choice but to just sit there in silence and try not to play with my phone. I still needed that to check into my hotel. During the hour I was waiting, I expected to see the limited express pass by, or a local train heading in the opposite direction, but there was nothing else on the tracks. Then, in the midst of all the silent darkness, the train I needed to catch suddenly appeared. I ran onto that train and I watched as the train pulled away from the wooden station platform, the creepy-looking house, and the unmanned attendant shack. About 5 months later, I had a meeting in place with the same client near that area. I decided to use the opportunity to see if I could find that weird station I was stuck at again. I made sure I went in the day because something about it at night just didn't feel right. The station looked the same, but instead of the platform being constructed of wood, it was now steel and stone. There was one station employee this time, and there, instead of that weird house, I saw a convenience store in its place. I couldn't believe how much it had changed in just 5 or 6 months. I looked around, and to me the station and the convenience store didn't look all that new. They looked as if they had been there for a long time. To this day, I sometimes wonder if I had been subjected to some sort of glitch in the Matrix. Was I spirited away to some yesterday of years gone by? I think about this all of the time, and a couple of questions come to my mind when I do. What would have happened to me if I left the station? Would I not been able to have come back? And I also wonder what might have happened if the train never came. Maybe I would have been stuck there. When our second child, my son, was 4 years old, we decided to move from Yokohama to my husband's hometown in Tohoku. I searched online for ages trying to find a nice place to live, and I managed to find somewhere nice. So I asked my sister-in-law to view the property on our behalf, and it looked perfect. It was a rental, but essentially a pretty big house. It had hardwood floors, and it was on a quiet little street. The rent was really cheap compared to Yokohama, and there were mountains just behind the house as well as a stream. I decided that it would be the perfect environment to raise our children. I imagined them growing a rich interest in nature. We were so happy to move, and it turned out to be exactly how we had hoped. My husband and I were in love with the house. When we met the neighbors, I was pleasantly surprised to hear that they had migrated from Yokohama just like we had, so we had plenty to talk about. They also had children the same sort of age as ours, so we quickly became very friendly with our neighbors. This was most welcome as it did take some time to get acclimated. I felt like we didn't really fit in with the people who lived in the countryside. It was a bit cliquey. We moved in during late summer, and things went really well. Nothing much really happened, but a few months later, snow began to fall. One day it started snowing during the day, and by the time we had finished dinner, I looked outside at our garden, and there was about 5 centimeters of fresh snow. I gave my kids a bath and got them into their beds, and I headed back downstairs to join my husband in the living room. And that was when we first heard it. I heard this strange animal-like growling sound, and it sounded like it was coming from outside, somewhere close by, where we were sitting in the living room. I could hear that growling sound so clearly, even when the TV was on and all the windows were shut. My husband could hear it too. We both looked at one another in silence. We paused the TV to listen a little more clearly. The growl was very deep and powerful. I started to wonder if it was a wild dog or a bear. Those thoughts frightened me, because if there was some big animal out there, it could easily try and smash its way into our home if it smelt something it wanted. I went into protection mode. I readied myself. I grabbed my phone just in case, and I held it tightly. We sat there, listening to that low, guttural growling, and then it changed, as if it started to attack something. We then heard a really loud, high-pitched scream. My husband jumped to his feet. He left the room and returned with a flashlight in his hand. He said, "Come on, let's look from the window upstairs." We crept into my eldest son's bedroom to look out of his window as it faced the direction we heard the growls and screams coming from, and my husband shone his flashlight outside. It was as if those growls and screams were in unison, like it was one creature making these varied screams and growls. It was very unnerving. We squinted, and looked everywhere but couldn't see anything. My eldest son was awake. He must have heard those bestial growls and woken up. He was pulling the covers up to just beneath his eyes, and he looked scared. We could hear the screams and growls outside rising. So we tried to see if we could see anyone or anything out there, but once again we couldn't see a thing. My husband said he was going out to check it out, and I desperately tried to stop him. We ended up having a bit of a heated argument. While we were arguing, all the strange and frightening noises coming from outside suddenly stopped. The following morning, when I woke up, I went to look outside to see if there were any signs of anything out there. I don't know what I was expecting to find, maybe some footprints, but there wasn't anything. Just pure white snow. I spent most of the day thinking about the night before's events. I ended up being so curious about it, I went to ask my neighbor if he had heard or seen anything last night. Since he had been living there for 2 more years than we had, I figured that if this had happened before, he might be able to tell me a little more about whatever it was. I will call my neighbor Mr. A. Mr. A said that he had heard the same roaring noises that we had before. The first time he heard it, he thought that it could have been a bear, so he called the police. This was at about 11 p.m. Roughly around the same time we had heard it last night. Police officers came out with some rangers. I don't know what they're called, but maybe animal control is a closer word. They came out and searched the area but found nothing. Mr. A made a report, but nothing much happened beyond that. He said that he had heard a lot of different voices all intertwining at once, and that kind of made sense to me. When I thought back to what I heard, I would say that that was similar. It was like a massive raucous shouting, growling, screaming noise. Kind of like a crowd, or maybe a riot. Mr. A said that he thought that it was very strange that he couldn't find a trace of anyone after all that noise he had heard. It had played on his mind, just like it had played on mine. He said, "Come to think of it now, it was snowing that day too." He had this kind of surprised look on his face. He went on to say that he wasn't satisfied by the inaction of the local police, so he decided to head out and search for any traces in the snow himself. He couldn't find anything of interest, so he just went home confused and creeped out. The following day he went to visit his landlord, but before he even got there, word had already reached his landlord's ears that there had been an incident the night before. His landlord was a woman in her 90s, and she owned a lot of land in the area, basically the whole street. Our house too. The information exchange in the countryside is honestly terrifying. The policeman was probably the one who told Mr. A's landlord. She knew exactly what he had come to ask her about. "It comes down the mountains every now and then, don't pay it much mind. It's like a god." Mr. A said that he wasn't buying that, and he didn't like the way she was so dismissive of what he had heard. The stubborn old landlady wouldn't budge though. She said, "There's nothing we can do about it, it's a local thing. If you don't like it, leave, that's fine by me. It means you no harm. You can't do anything about it. You can't do anything about it, so don't let it bother you." Mr. A's story was very intriguing, and it reminded me of the first time I walked around our new area. I took a walk with my children. We wanted to get our bearings and get used to our new surroundings. So as you go up the mountain paths, you are first struck with the number of old graves and crumbling statues. There were these tall old trees with ropes attached to them. It was like it belonged to another era. We met our landlord out there, who happened to be the same landlord as Mr. A's. I remembered what she said to me and my family. "Don't go too far, you'll get lost." I found that warning a little odd because it wasn't a particularly big mountain range. I have hiked bigger with my family. I figured you could be up and down that mountain within a couple of hours, so I didn't understand why she thought that we could get lost there. I told Mr. A about the encounter and wondered out loud if it was related to his experience, and he said, "Oh, of course. I have been up in that mountain there, and there is a shrine at the top of it. It's pretty creepy." He said this with that strange wry smile on his face again. I didn't know that there was a shrine out there, behind my house. I was surprised and a bit more spooked out by my new town. "It's not just that mad chorus of voices and screams we heard you have to worry about," Mr. A said. "Almost all of the houses on our street have the same layout. All the doors are these sliding frosted glass doors. We both said how much we didn't like those doors, but because they gave us no privacy, so we had both put up a curtain rod with curtains so people couldn't look from the outside in. Also, each house had a skylight, and we spoke about how it was a little odd. Mr. A said that he really didn't like his. He said that he had seen strange shadows dancing across it during the twilight hours. He said that he saw shadows moving around outside the frosted glass front door as well. The skylight was so high up it was really weird to hear that he had seen some shadows out there. I think he was implying that they were not passing clouds, but something living or something else. Mr. A said that he noticed something about when the shadows came to visit him. When they came to his door, he would find dead things there in the morning. There would be a pile of dead centipedes and some dead birds just neatly lined up on his doorstep. It didn't feel as if they died there naturally to him. Despite all of those weird goings on, Mr. A seemed content to live there. It was mind-boggling to me. I was mentally packing our suitcases. He had that wry smile on his face again as he told me that. It was like he was enjoying these nasty experiences with me, and I didn't like it. I went home frightened, in all honesty. I ordered some new curtains online, as well as one for the skylight. Thanks to those thick new curtains, I didn't see any of the shadows that Mr. A mentioned. I did, however, find some dead animals in our back garden. Some dead snakes and some dead birds were there. I couldn't say it was a coincidence. I wondered if the shadows Mr. A had mentioned had paid our family home a visit. Things got even weirder when my children would talk about the mountain behind our home. They would say things like, "Mom, look there's a ghost on the mountain, I can see her." My eldest son would often play with Mr. A's daughter, and he told me that she said to him once that something had come down from the mountain and had tried to take her away. It was all getting seriously scary. Things seemed to be going really badly for us. My relationship with my in-laws became so incredibly strained that I felt as if we needed to leave. Thankfully, my husband wasn't having much luck in his new job either, so he was happy to agree to go back to Yokohama. We had both been suffering in silence. We should have said how we felt to one another sooner. Since moving back to Yokohama, I have kept in touch with Mr. A. He still lives out there in Tohoku, and sometimes he lets me know when something creepy has happened in the area. He said he is waiting for his daughter to get to high school age, and then they'll move out. It was such a weird experience, I can hardly believe it happened sometimes. I think that landlord lady knows something. I don't feel like digging any deeper though. I don't want to see dead animals outside my door in Yokohama. I decided to put curtains up in our new place, just in case. I'll take them down when I'm ready. Thanks for listening to my story. Sorry I don't have much for you in terms of a conclusion. I'm an old man now, but this happened when I was younger. I wanted to share this story just in case it helps someone. I drove to a remote tourist location one night and parked in its parking lot. I was alone and at a bit of a loose end. We didn't have much going on that night. I think it was about 8 p.m. when I started to get a little drowsy. I ended up falling asleep. I don't know how long I was asleep for, but I eventually woke up at the sound of tapping at the window. I woke up with a stiff neck and I turned my head to the direction the tapping came from. There was a woman stood by my driver's side door. She was desperately tapping at the window. She looked pretty young, and she was alone. I was really confused since I was groggy after just waking up. She was speaking, but I couldn't hear, so I opened the window a little, and in a frantic voice, she pleaded with me to help her and to hurry up and open the door. She said that she had been chased by a man. I was sure that it was real despite having just woke up. At one point, I thought for the briefest of moments that I might have seen a ghost. But then that thought was banished instantly. It was real, and it was happening. I hurriedly went to unlock and open the door to help her, but then for some reason, I hesitated. Something just felt off. Something felt a little strange about it all. For instance, her hair, makeup, and clothes were in perfect order. There wasn't a hair out of place on her head, none of her makeup ran, and if you were being chased, you would expect to sweat, right? Something just didn't add up here. She was good at looking frantic and frightened to an extent, but somehow, it seemed forced to me. It was like she knew what she was going to say before she said it. Like it was a bit of an act. I looked around from inside the car, and I didn't see anyone else in the vicinity. No other cars in the parking lot either. I felt scared at that point. A part of me really wanted to help because if it was me in her shoes, or any of my family members, then I would want to count on the kindness of a stranger. But I just wasn't buying her story. I decided to start my engine just in case. I figured that I could use the help of my headlights to see if there was any truth to her claims. I didn't see anything in front of my car, but when I went to adjust my rear view mirror, something caught my eye. I saw several figures. They were all male by the look of them, and they were crouched behind my car like they were runners at a starting block. When I saw the woman's quick glance back to them, once she realized I had seen them, I stepped on the gas. I floored it and I got out of that car park. It was pretty difficult to drive initially because I had adjusted my seat to sleep earlier. When I was far enough away from the car park, I checked the time and I found it was just after 2 a.m. I remember thinking that those men were probably trying to hide in my blind spot. They knew exactly what they were doing. If I had unlocked the door, I think, at the very least, I would have been robbed. Maybe something worse might have happened, I don't know. That night taught me to park in places that are well lit and close to surveillance cameras. I tend to park in the center of parking lots these days. From that day forth, I didn't sleep in my car in sketchy areas like that parking lot again. If I sleep in my car, I want to be somewhere where there's lots of lights, restrooms, vending machines, and cameras. In any case, the one massive plus I take away from that night was the fact that that woman didn't need my help. She wasn't abducted or chased. I hate her for being so devious, but I'm glad she wasn't in danger, I suppose. Be careful out there, please, people. This happened when I was on a trip in Kyoto. I was set to be staying in a traditional Japanese inn, a ryokan. The inn was incredibly old, as they usually are. It was mainly a wooden construction. It was a work trip. I work as a tour guide up and down the country. This isn't as luxurious as it sounds, by the way. The reason being, my company always booked the cheapest hotel rooms they could find for its employees. Work trips, and more often than not, employees shared rooms to make another saving. I was relatively new to the company when this experience took place. It seemed as if the room in the inn that my colleagues and I were going to be staying in was one that wasn't often rented out. The inn was almost fully booked, besides that room apparently. When I got in there, I thought, whoa, it's pretty dark, and it's actually pretty creepy in here. But I didn't know why I felt that way. I had some time to kill before we had dinner, so I looked around the hotel room. I opened a big closet door to see what was in there, and then when I closed the closet door and turned to leave, I noticed something behind it. There was some kind of door. I shoved the heavy wardrobe to one side to get a better look at it. Affixed to the door was this strange kind of talisman that looked to me like a kind of seal of some religious variety. The door was sealed tight. There were no gaps. I guessed that this must have been the door to the attic since we were on the top floor. That weird door gave me goosebumps. I moved the wardrobe back where it was. I thought the dim light in the room was the cause of that creepy feeling I had before, but I guessed that the door might have had something to do with it. I didn't feel like being alone in that room anymore, so I went to try and find the other guys. There were 4 of us in total. All of us were going to be sleeping in that room. I told one of my colleagues about my discovery, the weird, sealed-off hidden door, but he didn't seem that fazed. He wasn't even that interested. I asked him outright why he wasn't surprised by what I found, and he said, "Well, if I spent my time looking for things to be surprised at, then I wouldn't exactly be focused on my work, now would I?" Suit yourself, I thought, as I walked off. I was convinced that there wouldn't be any other rooms left available in the inn, so I just had to bear it. At least, I wasn't going to be sleeping alone. That was something, I guess. We all hung out, talking about work and what we would be doing tomorrow, in a kind of informal meeting, until about 1 a.m. Although it sounds boring, it turned out to be a pretty fun night. We had a couple of drinks, everybody loosened up a little, and I felt a little bit more at ease. I took a bath. It was a very nice bath, actually, and then I went to bed at about 2 a.m. Everyone else was just about ready for bed by that time too. About 10 minutes after the lights went out, we were all in bed and I heard some light snoring. I guessed that everyone was asleep. I, on the other hand, couldn't get to sleep no matter how many times I flipped the pillow or changed my position. It was around that time that I started to hear the noises. At first I could hardly hear it, but then after a few moments, the sound grew louder. It was coming from above us. It sounded like someone was walking around up there. It sounded like someone was just walking around and around in a circle. After a while longer, I heard a second pair of footsteps. The second set of footsteps sounded like they were a little further away from the first. It sounded like the 2 owners of those footsteps were talking. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I could get a sense of the tones that they were using. And I can say that the tone I was hearing wasn't a nice tone. It sounded like they were having an argument. I didn't like it, because obviously I knew that the door to the attic was sealed shut, and it had a wardrobe in front of it. Those voices and footsteps up there really freaked me out. There surely couldn't be anyone up there. I asked myself that question, but I was unable to answer it. I worked myself up so much that I really wanted to turn the light on. I was essentially scared of the dark as an adult, and it was pretty embarrassing in a room full of other adult men. I'm a man too, by the way. I tried to resist, but I couldn't fight it. I was scared. I got up and I headed towards the light switch. As soon as the lights came on, all the noises from above stopped, and the attic fell silent. I stood there in place by the light switch for a moment, listening intently, and then I woke up one of my colleagues. I had to talk to someone. I went for my work friend who was the nicest to me, not that guy I spoke to earlier. I woke him up and I told him what happened. He was annoyed, of course, that I woke him up, but overall not that surprised by what I had to say. He said that there was a reason why this room was so cheap, and a couple of them found out last time, after they heard strange noises. They ended up searching online about the inn after they stayed there. They read that others had experienced things, and some said that it was haunted. He then asked me, "Why do you think we all stayed up so late?" I asked him why the hell he didn't tell me that we were staying in a goddamn haunted house. He said that if I knew it was haunted, I'd never go to sleep. He said that because he knew my character. Well, how kind of you, my friend. I thought as I slunk back to my bed. I buried my head in the covers and I barely got a wink of sleep that night. I think something very sad happened up in the attic of the inn. I get that feeling. I don't particularly want to find out what it was, though. This happened when I used to work in a supermarket. A typhoon had been reported to be approaching our town, and that day there were a lot of customers entering the store from the morning onwards. I think they all wanted to get everything they needed before the heavy rain began to fall. That rainfall wouldn't begin until the evening, by the time it started to get dark out. It got darker quicker than usual, as it was autumn here. There were almost no customers coming and going by the time it was dark. I say almost no customers because some came in now and then, but nothing like a normal weekday night. I looked up as I was sorting out the shopping baskets to see a mother of about 30 and a girl about the age of 6 walk in. I greeted them quickly, and then went back to organizing the baskets by the entrance. While I was looking down, they must have walked into the store. By the time I was back inside, I saw them over by the vegetable aisle. Something was a little off about them to me. I will let you know what I found so off-putting. So, most people when they're shopping or browsing will look up and down the aisles at products, maybe even reach out to check some items. You know how to shop, I don't even know why I feel the need to mention it, but with that in mind, the mother and daughter was just pacing up and down the aisles without really looking at anything. They were just looking forward and slightly higher than the shelf line. They didn't even pick up a basket. I couldn't figure out the reason they came in here in the first place. They weren't even shopping. But then I thought to myself, hang on, they might be trying to steal something. It didn't look like they were, but there was definitely something up with a pair of them. I kept an eye on them as they passed through the meat section. Then suddenly they passed through the staff-only door next to the meat. I rushed over to them to let them know they shouldn't be back there, but by the time I pushed the door open, they were gone. I couldn't find them. It really looked like they had headed in there, but maybe I was mistaken. It played on my mind for the rest of my shift. I expected to see them at some point during the remainder of my shift, but I never did. As I was getting ready to leave for the night, I jokingly mentioned my encounter to the manager. I was expecting a laugh out of him, or for him to say something like, that's because you were tired and it was a slow day, but no, that's not what I got. That's not what he said at all. He took his glasses off, turned to me in his swivel chair and said, I've seen them too. For some reason, sometimes when there's a typhoon, you see them, and there's others. They come in and enter that room near the back of the store. I didn't know what to make of it the first time I saw them. So I asked one of the employees. You won't know her, she's retired, she went before you joined. She told me that she thought that those two were the victims of a road traffic accident that happened not too far from here. Now, she said that accident happened about 15 years ago. Apparently, the cause of the accident was down to the low visibility due to an approaching typhoon. Apparently, they were on their way to our store. So they come back to the store when a typhoon is getting closer, possibly because they are tied to carry out the same task, as it was never completed. I don't know why they go to the back room there. Maybe the store layout was different before I joined. Do you know the crossroads? Just a little ways up from the loading area? Yeah, that's where they say that fatal accident took place. I'm not sure if this is all true, but it makes sense to me. And the other employees believed it. There are plans to completely renovate the store in the next year, and it makes me feel a little sad because I don't know what will happen to them. Where will they go? His story made me feel sad, but not scared. If I see them next time a typhoon approaches, I won't be scared. I wonder if there's something I can do, or should do, to show them the way. I wouldn't like to ward them off by blessing the area, or laying salt everywhere. I just want them to be at peace. This happened when I got into university. It was a uni in Tokyo. Rent was gonna kill me, but thankfully a relative stepped in at the 11th hour. He owned an apartment there. I was told that I could move in at any time and rent would be free. I was over the moon. I think I started living there in early March. It wasn't a perfect deal though. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was grateful, but it wasn't exactly what I had in mind. The apartment was in a very old building, and the rent was very cheap, and most of the residents weren't from Japan. It wasn't designed for students, is what I'm saying. So there I was, surrounded by various smells and language barriers. I felt like I didn't belong, you know? But my uncle assured me that it would be fine, and above all, rent was free. I mean, who am I to complain? By the way, I didn't hate being around non-native people. I mean, it's just something I have to point out for this experience. I decided to make a go of it there. In April, classes started. I made many friends, joined many clubs, and discovered drinking. It was a riot. Every day felt like a rush. It was fun. One night I came back to my apartment after the 3rd day of a 7-day binge. I was knackered, honestly, man. I kind of threw my hand up at the door to unlock it and leant on the door to gain entrance. I was really tired. I felt a sudden strange feeling of being out of place. As I pushed the door open, it revealed a surprising sight. There was a woman sat at the table. She had long dark hair. She looked to be Filipino. "Oh, I'm really sorry, I must have got the wrong apartment," I blurted out as I closed the door. That was really weird and embarrassing as hell. Even though I was pretty drunk, something didn't seem right. I guess mistaking the apartment is easily done, but why the hell did my key work in someone else's door? That's pretty disturbing. I looked at the door number, looked at the photos I had taken on my phone of my address, and it matched up. Something was very wrong here. I felt as if I had suddenly sobered up. Was there someone in my apartment? I put the key in the lock and I slowly turned it. I fearfully pushed the door open, and through squinted eyes I saw the inside of my apartment. There was no one sat at the table when I opened the door now. Was I so drunk that I was seeing things? I guessed I was a little overtired. I was convinced the booze and lack of sleep was to blame. I fell asleep pretty easily that night. A few months went by and I had almost forgotten about what happened that night, because nothing else happened. Until something weird happened. I want to tell you about it, but first I'll have to tell you about the apartment. It's kind of hard to explain, but the layout of my apartment went like this. When you walk through the door, you will see a door to the bathroom on the right and the kitchenette further along on the left. When you get down the hall, you will see a table in the main room. The walls are a standard grey colour and the windows have railings. I lived on the 2nd floor, and the window in the lounge area looked out onto the street below. That window is the window I want to tell you about. When the nights and days were brighter and summer had come to Tokyo, I started to hear a strange series of noises coming from the window at night. Those noises would always creep me the hell out when I was home alone at night. It would start up at around 1 or 2 a.m., and it was a dull, thudding kind of sound. It sounded like someone was banging on the walls. It didn't really follow a pattern, you know? It wasn't as if it was a certain day of the week or an exact time, but one thing it was regular. At first I thought that it could be someone or something hitting the window from outside. I checked it and it didn't look like someone could reach the window easily, and nothing was out there that could be blown by the wind to clatter into it. It was summer anyway, 40 degrees outside with crazy humidity. There was no breeze. I wondered what the hell the person next door was doing then. I couldn't think what else it could be. I felt bad to ask questions to people who can't understand what I'm asking completely. The sound wouldn't usually last longer than 5 minutes each time, so I decided that I could just live with it. One night, one of the lights in my room went out. Even when I changed the light bulb, the light wouldn't work. I wondered if there was an issue with the wiring. I headed into town the next day to ask about how I could get it repaired. I mean, I was living there for nothing. I might as well try to help a little with household repairs. I found a local handyman and I went into his store. I told him the issue and he smiled. He was really nice. But when I told him my address, the smile on his face disappeared. "Do you really live in that apartment?" I felt a little weirded out. Was something going on here? I asked him what he meant. According to the local repairman, a former resident took her life in that apartment. She was a migrant worker from the Philippines. Apparently the method was hanging, and she did it by the window. That was also how the body was discovered, by a passerby. Imagine that. My blood ran cold. Things started to make sense now. The woman I had seen that drunken night wasn't down to me going into someone else's apartment. I had potentially seen an apparition. The noises I was hearing at night as well, the dull thuds which lasted no longer than 5 minutes. Could those thuds be caused by her feet skittering against the window as she hung by her neck? The desperate kicks still resonating in that apartment at night, signaling her spirit was likely not at peace. I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. I walked home in the scorching summer heat with my forehead covered in a cold sweat and chills throughout my body. I looked for another place, and until I got it sorted, I stayed with a friend. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but it all started with a program I watched on TV. I had been watching it for about 2 years or so, I guess. So you could call me a fan. It wasn't a popular TV show. It had a minor following online, and each episode was only about 30 minutes long. It has since gone off the air, but one of the segments of the show would ask the viewers to send in creepy submissions. To be honest, I think that was the best part of the show, and I didn't love the other segments. Just to give you a flavor of what some of the submissions were like, I'll give you some examples. There was one where this guy sent in a video of his pet acting really strangely. That one was pretty scary. Another one was of someone filming a very odd billboard as they passed through some town in the middle of nowhere. I can't remember what was on the billboard exactly, but that one was really weird. If you submitted a video of something strange and mysterious, and your video was selected to be on the show, then you won a prize. Every time I watched that show, I would think to myself, I could come up with something that would make it on the show. The prize, whatever it was, didn't really matter to me. I just wanted to think up something cool to fit the theme. Then my idea came to me. Although I guess it wasn't the most entertaining idea, it was my idea, and I couldn't wait to get started on my creation. I immediately started preparations, and the more I did, the more I loved it. It was a fairly straightforward idea. I wanted to attach a noose to something like a tree limb and make a sign to go with it. That's all it was. I wanted my sign to read, "Feel free to use this." And I wanted to be able to stake it into the ground, so all I needed was some wood. After I made the sign, next was the rope. I had to look online for how to make a noose. I thought it was going to be difficult, but it was a little easier than I thought. Hi, Jay here. Feel free to use this is a common phrase that you might see outside of public restrooms and drinking fountains in parks. That should give you a little bit of an idea of the writer's intentions. Back to the story. Now my creation was ready. All I needed to do next was to find a place to take a photo or a video of it, and then I could make my submission. I had some annual leave left available, so I decided to take a day off and drive out to the woods. I drove for miles to get there, because I knew that there was a quiet and peaceful forest just on the outskirts of the city. I got out of the car at a random spot, and I carried my rope and my handmade sign with me, careful to make sure I wasn't seen by anyone. I knew these woods were very, very quiet there. I headed into the woods. I was walking through the forest, and as I got deeper in, I managed to find what I considered to be the perfect spot. I found a solid pine tree. It was pretty big, and it had thick branches. There was a really thick one that jutted out about 3 meters above ground level, which is close to 10 feet. Just in front of the tree, I stuck my "Please feel free to use this" sign into the ground. I made sure it was really deep. Thankfully, it had rained that day, so the ground was plenty moist. Next, I climbed the tree, which proved to be very difficult in those conditions. And then I shimmied over to the branch that I had selected, and I tied the noose. When all was complete, I climbed down from the tree and stood in admiration of my work. I was pretty satisfied. By now, I'm sure you get my idea. I wanted to take a short video of me stumbling across a noose hanging from a tree with a sign in front of it saying, "Please feel free to use this." I know it's not in good taste, but I was certain it would have been good enough to get on that TV show. I thought it was actually a really cool idea. However, when I went to take the video, something didn't seem quite right to me. It looked all a little too new, if you know what I mean. The "please feel free to use this" sign that I had bought from a hardware store in the city stood out like a sore thumb. Also, the wood I used to make my stake and sign looked like it had just been picked out of a timber yard. It looked fake. And though it was, I wanted to make my video look real. One saving grace was the rope. That didn't look too bad, but this brand new sign, supposedly being discovered deep in the forest, would not do. I had to think of how I could make my video. I didn't want to go to all that effort and then not make a submission. I thought about it for a while, and then it came to me. Because it had been raining, and more rain was forecast, I figured that if I left my sign out there for a while, it might end up looking a little more authentic. You know, a little more weather-beaten or something like that. I figured the wood of the sign would get covered in dirt and leaves from the wind and rain, and that would create the desolate atmosphere that I was looking for. Of course, I was a little worried that some hiker or someone would find it and remove it, but I guess that was a risk I just had to take. If I wasn't living in an apartment block, I would have put my sign in my garden or something. I was worried that someone might get mad and destroy the sign. You know, some overcautious, easy-to-offend know-it-all. I didn't want the law to get involved either, because to me this was nothing but a light-hearted prank. I don't think that I had committed a crime. I mean, essentially it's just a piece of art, right? With all that in mind, I decided not to be that bothered by leaving it there. Who cares, was my final thought as I headed back to my car through the forest. The following couple of days became very busy for me, and before I knew it, I had completely forgotten about making my video and the sign and the noose out there in the woods. Exactly 1 month later, I remembered that my piece of art was still out there in the woods. I remembered while I was watching that TV show, the one I was supposed to be submitting my video to. I immediately got in my car and drove off to the forest to see if it was still there. During the month I had forgotten about it, there had been some typhoons passing through my prefecture. When I arrived back at the forest, I noticed that there had been a lot of growth. The weeds and brush were difficult to wade through, the grass was thick, and the forest floor was littered with broken tree branches and leaves. It made it tricky to find my creation, and I would be lying if I said I didn't get a little lost. It didn't help that it was getting dark out too. Not too dark there. I found it after a while, but the second I laid eyes on my creation, I knew that I couldn't capture it on film. As I had hoped for, the atmosphere surrounding the tree looked, in a word, desolate. My signboard, which, when I left it, was a brilliant white, had now greyed, and the letters had slightly run. One thing was the words, "Feel free." They stood out as their letters looked completely untouched by the elements, and that was pretty eerie to me, but not as eerie as what I saw. Because someone had taken my prank very literally. The noose that hung from the tree now suspended a body a few feet off of the ground. I think it was a woman, as the hair was long. It was matted with leaves and slick with rainwater. I couldn't see her face, and I'm very grateful for that. I didn't know what stage of decomposition the body was in, and I didn't want to. However, just based on how static the body hung, I could tell that there was no life there. Due to the wind, the body slowly swung side to side now and then, and the tree limb and the noose creaked and squeaked in the breeze. The body slowly twirled, and just at the point where it would have been side-on facing me, revealing the face of the victim, I ran for it, and I ran as fast as I could. I was so scared. I am still scared, by the way. I thought about calling the police, but it turned out I was too scared of doing that too. If I reported it to the police, then what would happen to me? They would find out that I was the one who set it up. They might even stupidly think that I encouraged people somehow. I have wondered if what I did can be considered an assisted suicide. I don't think it should be. I don't think I should be accused of a crime when all I did was make a sign. I guess at the very worst, it could be seen as a mean-spirited prank and nothing more than that. But the thought that I could be accused of goading her into making her final decision, if I could be seen as encouraging her, that scares me the most because that wasn't my intention. And that could get me in a lot of trouble. This all happened 2 years ago, and I still haven't reported it. I can't report it. I could get into so much trouble. It plays on my mind so often though, not because I feel some tremendous sense of guilt or anything, but because it could be the end of me. I keep an eye on the newspapers and the local news for any discoveries out there in those woods, but so far, there's been nothing. That's pretty frightening for me too, because for all I know, that body, that poor woman, may still be undiscovered, still squeaking and creaking in the breeze. I first met her when I was on my way home from work. I remember that night so clearly. I was crossing the road from the bus stop opposite my building. There was a small park across the road by the bus stop. I had to walk through that to get home. I was living alone at the time this happened. I heard a voice call out to me from behind the phone booth in the park. "There's a full-length mirror in your home, right?" Well, my heart started beating out of my chest. I'm a bit of a jumpy person. I mean, that question was disturbing though. Am I wrong? Who asks someone that? I quickly turned around to face the direction of the person who asked me that question. There was a woman craning her head from behind the phone booth. She was dressed in dark colors. Was it beige or black? I can't remember. She was stood there kind of hunched over. I hadn't ever seen that woman before. I would say that she was in her 40s at a guess. To me, she was a total stranger. Without skipping a beat, the woman went on with her line of questioning. "There's a full-length mirror in your home, right? It's about this big, isn't it?" As she said that, she began to mime a long rectangle shape with her fingers. "You should get rid of that mirror. Throw it away. It's bad. Bad things can happen. Is it a memory? Can't help it if it's a memory." I realized that that woman was crazy. I stood my ground and thought I would come back to her with a firm tone. "No, there's nothing like that. Don't worry. I better be going now," I said as I left. I started to quickly walk back to my apartment, but I heard footfall coming from behind me. It was as if that woman didn't hear a word I said. She just kept prattling on to me. I know. I live next door. Next door. Hey, just throw it away. Is it a memory? Be a shame if it was a memento, but that can't be helped though. You should throw it away tomorrow." At that point, I thought the best thing I could do would be to just ignore her. I could see that this conversation was going nowhere. I thought she would get tired and leave me alone. However, my plan didn't exactly work out. She followed me into my building. We had a communal area, which wasn't behind a security door, so anyone could walk on in. So that's what she did. She followed me in, and she waited with me while I called the elevator. I mean, there was a chance that she could have been my neighbor, I thought. I didn't really run into my neighbors all that much. She kept going on and on in these nonsensical circles. I couldn't stand listening to her anymore, so I said, "That's enough. I don't have a full-length mirror." I raised my voice. I was getting really annoyed. "Don't lie. You already know it. Your education is bad. There is a full-length mirror in your room. About this big, isn't it?" she said, as she began to mime a long rectangle shape again with her fingers. She followed me into the elevator at the last second. Had I known that she would have joined me in the elevator, then there would have been no chance that I would have taken it. I would have taken the stairs. I wanted nothing but to be away from this rambling maniac. She kept saying the dumb same phrases and miming that long mirror shape with her hands. It was like it was a spell or something. The elevator took us to the 7th floor, my floor, and as soon as the doors opened, I ran to apartment 708, which was my apartment. I scrambled to unlock the door, expecting that crazy woman to chase after me, but she didn't. She stood by the elevator and shouted, "Throw away the full-length mirror. Is it a memory?" I calmed down a little after I was behind a locked door. That woman shook me up. I found myself trying to dissect the meaning of her strange words as I lay in bed that night. I couldn't make head or tail of it. It made no sense. By the way, not like it matters at all, but I was a 25-year-old woman living alone when this happened. So if some of you reading this are thinking that you wouldn't be shaken up by what happened, try to empathize with me and remember that woman was a complete stranger to me. Come the morning, I couldn't get her words out of my head. I guess that was due to the rough night of sleep that I had had. I went to work feeling so tired and groggy. My coworkers teased me that day, asking if I had a hangover. When the day was done and I was approaching my building, I cringed at the sight of that creepy middle-aged woman dressed in either beige or black waiting for me. I knew what was coming before she opened her mouth, a repeat of yesterday's ramblings. "There's a full-length mirror in your home, right? It's about as big as this, isn't it?" As she said that, she began to mime a long rectangle shape with her fingers once again. "Is it a memory? Is it a memory?" I decided to ignore her again. I mean, what else could I have done in that situation? I got in the elevator, and so did she. I couldn't stop her, because she had said she lived here. Only this time when I got out of the elevator on my floor, she followed me right up to my door. I did not like that one bit, so I spun around to give her a piece of my mind. "Listen, lady, if you keep this up, then I'm gonna go to the police, okay?" And then, quick as a flash, as if she didn't hear, she continued with her ramblings. "I live next door. Let me in and I'll show you. I will help you throw it away. It can't be helped if it's just a memory." I was sleep-deprived and severely irritated, and this crazy neighbor had just gotten on my last remaining nerve, so I let her have it. "What the hell are you talking about? What is in my apartment has nothing to do with you." I screamed at her, and I didn't care who heard me. The strange woman then said, in an exceptionally calm manner, despite the rage I had just thrown her way, "A mirror is, well, it doesn't just reflect light, does it? It also reflects bad energy, an evil spirit passing from your home into mine. It's reflected in the full-length mirror, and it comes into my home." I had had enough. I asked her with a smile on my face, "Are you actually crazy?" "Look, Ma-kun got into an incident, you see, and Ma-kun is currently in the hospital. If this carries on, then Ma-kun will die, right? So that full-length mirror in your home, please throw it away. Is it a memory?" I gave up. What was the point in wasting my time speaking to this maniac? I opened my door really forcefully, entered, slammed it shut, and locked it. There was no point talking to that woman. While I was in my home, I heard that woman still going on and on out there. "Is it a memory? Still, it can't be helped, can it? The full-length mirror, it's about this big, isn't it?" I turned on the lights in my apartment and I went to contact the landlord. I said that I had been having some trouble with my neighbor and I wanted it resolved immediately. I said it in a bit of a panic, I guess, because I was all worked up. The adrenaline was pumping. If that crazy lady kept pushing me, then I didn't want to be responsible for my actions. The landlord listened to me, but didn't seem as interested as I would have expected him to be. Then, suddenly, my doorbell started ringing. So I started saying to the landlord, "Listen, that's her. That's that crazy lady who lives next door. You gotta do something about her. I'm losing my mind over here. And the landlord then replied with a lazy, "Uh-huh." I could barely hear him over the doorbell. I thought I heard a man's voice outside my apartment too for a moment. "Listen, if you're talking about apartment 707, no one lives there. We used to have a guy who lived there. Yeah, but he died in the end. Now some cell phone company rents it, and they just use it for storage. Guy called Ma Kun or something. He was in there before, but trust me, nobody's in there now. So I don't know. Call the police or something, because that ain't my tenant." I hung up and I felt completely shocked and alone. The woman outside kept talking about the mirror and kept asking me if it was a memory or not, and I didn't know what to do. That Ma Kun she mentioned before was real, but that mirror wasn't. Well, as far as I know. I knew what I had in my apartment, and I knew there wasn't a full-length mirror. I ended up calling the police once I pulled myself together, and I'm not sure if they caught that woman or not, because technically no crime was committed according to them. I mean, I felt as if she was stalking me, but apparently that wasn't the case. I did the best thing I could do for my mental health, and I moved at the first chance I got. The next place I moved to wasn't half as nice, but at least I never encountered a fake neighbor as weird as that lady was. I really wanted to make sense of the words she was saying to me. I remember them verbatim. Is it a memory? What does that mean? I have no clue. I wonder if she's bothering the next tenant. On a side note, I guess. Ever since I had that unpleasant encounter, I don't like full-length mirrors that are about as big as this, and I don't wish to own one. I don't know why, maybe I just want to be on the safe side. I don't want to end up like Markun, I guess.